Welcome, everybody. This is our webinar on what we call Crypto 101. And we want to thank you for joining us. This will be recorded. So eventually we'll have links to this that we can offer to other friends who signed up and weren't able to join us. But the idea behind this came from, we're seeing a lot of comments online, particularly on Facebook. We had a lot of people posting on Free State Project that they were interested in crypto and Bitcoin and blockchain and all that, but really didn't know where to start. So Amy, who's on our call tonight, is the operations and marketing manager for Porcupine Real Estate, suggested that we do this sort of introduction to crypto and blockchain, and it's a great idea. And what we'll do is we're going to follow this up a week from tonight with a little bit more advanced knowledge, but we basically want to put together this panel of a few experts to tell us about cryptocurrency, blockchain, and how people can learn more. So let me, by the way, I'm Mark Warden, the founder and broker for Porcupine Real Estate, which is an all-libertarian residential real estate firm based in New Hampshire. And we work with a lot of people relocating to New Hampshire, as well as locals who are looking for real estate. But I was the first broker in New Hampshire to accomplish a Bitcoin sale. Back in 2017, sold a house for Bitcoin in Manchester, New Hampshire. And that got us some fun buzz. It was pretty cool. And I got my title company to set up a wallet to accept the deposit. And then at the closing, we signed our documents, and the seller sent to the buyer sent to the seller on his phone the balance of Bitcoin. We waited for a few confirmations, took about 20 minutes, and handed over the keys. It was really great. And the title company said that was the fastest closing they had ever seen, because with a wire transfer, you have to, it usually takes 3 to 4 hours, sometimes more, for the funds to transfer. So it was a precedent set, and we've done a few of them since then. So we've proven the model works, and that's why we wanted to open up this conversation tonight. Before I introduce our panelists, a couple things we'll discuss tonight. What is cryptocurrency? What is the blockchain? What is Bitcoin? What about Dash and Doge coin and some of these other altcoins? What is a privacy coin? What are seed phrases? What is an email, or what is a Bitcoin address? What is mining, staking, and how to hold our cryptos, whether in a hardware wallet or an exchange. So we invite comments and questions all along. We want this to be interactive. So Amy will be monitoring the chat room, and feel free to send your questions in the chat, and then we'll try to break periodically and answer those as best we can. Our two panelists tonight are Joel Valenzuela and Keith Ammon. Both these guys I consider experts in the space, and they've been doing this for a long time, and we'll be able to answer a lot of your technical questions, as well as give you an insight to some of the more common applications for Bitcoin in our everyday lives. So Joel, why don't you start? Tell us, I guess you've been living for several years just based on crypto. Give us your background and introduce yourself to the guests.
Yeah, hey everyone. So I'm Joel Valenzuela. I've been in the crypto space more or less for about, I guess, 9 years this year. And late 2015, I decided to stop being paid in dollars and only accept cryptocurrency for salary and payments like that. And I have not stopped since then. In 2016, I closed my bank account to run a sort of experiment on this, try to live as much as I could off cryptocurrency and see how that went. And so I'm a podcaster and content creator and do a whole bunch of other stuff in the space, like consulting on a few applications.
That's great. Thank you and welcome. Our other panelist tonight is Keith Ammon. Both Keith and I are in the state legislature, and he's put forward some legislation regarding Bitcoin, I think, or blockchain. We'll let him introduce himself, but it's pretty awesome what you're doing on that level.
Thanks, Mark. And hi, everyone. My name is Keith Amon. As Mark said, I'm a state legislator. I'm also a computer programmer. I was introduced to Bitcoin back in late 2010, early 2011. And so I've been sort of fixating on this topic for over a decade. Tomorrow in the State House, we'll be actually debating a bill on the floor that deals with cryptocurrency, something called controllable electronic records, which is sort of like an abstraction of cryptocurrency and distributed ledger technology. I won't go too much into that, but after this call, I have to write a speech for my floor debate tomorrow. I have a very short, simple, basic presentation on how blockchain works from a very rudimentary level. So if you want, I can screen share at some point in this call, just to give people sort of a foundation of how blockchain technology works, why it's such a big, why it's such an amazing innovation that is sort of on par with the creation of the internet. And so when this first came out, people had trouble getting their heads around it. We probably all drive automatic transmissions in our cars, and you've probably never taken one apart to see how it works. But you trust that it, gets you from point A to point B and works reliably. Blockchain under the hood is sort of that level. You can get really into it and discover all the intricacies of it, or you can sort of trust it because you don't have the time or curiosity to get too deep into it. But it's sort of like trusting your automatic transmission to work. I think, Mark, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Okay. Thank you, Keith. Yeah, I will set you up to allow screen sharing. That'd be great. In the meantime, Joel, just give us your version of what is cryptocurrency, what your definition is.
Yeah, so cryptocurrency is basically digital money that no one group or person controls. It's kind of everyone involved with it controls it. And from a more abstract principle, if you think about it, money is just a technology to communicate how we value things or what we value. So if I value you working hard on this thing, then I extend my value to you, and then you trade it for that. It just makes it's a tool, a technology to make things a lot easier. And so crypto is just the evolution of money. It's just the next stage of technology of money. And I just think that this is one of those things that future generations won't even question, they won't even think about twice about what is this or is it valid. It's just going to be a universal concept that kind of does that. And just the most important thing about cryptocurrency in general is that anyone can kind of use it relatively efficiently without asking anyone else's permission, without worrying about your bank's going to shut you down or the government's going to stop you from transacting or anything like that. It's digital cash. It's as easy to use, or as permissionless is the word they like to use. Anyone can just give you some cash, pay you under the table if they want to, or above board, and it can't be stopped like a bank account.
Okay, that's a great explanation. Thank you. Keith, why don't you follow up with that on what is the blockchain, and go ahead and screen share if this time is appropriate. And you're muted, Keith. And by the way, everybody can add to the chat room if you'd have some specific questions about this. Feel free to ask right now, because I have lots of questions, and I know these panelists will have some good answers for us.
Yeah, you're still muted, Keith. I don't know if you're trying to talk. Here we go.
How's that?
That's good.
All right. And then to screen share, do I have that?
Yes, you should have that capability.
I see it here. Okay. And I want to screen share. or you guys should be able to see my Twitter feed.
Yes, yeah, we see it, Dee, thank you.
I wanted to show it. I think it moved down. This is the Twitter account for the country of Ukraine. This is the official Twitter account for the country of Ukraine. And back on February 26th, they advertised their Bitcoin wallet address so that you could send donations directly to the country of Ukraine. So it's one, you don't have to get a wire transfer. You don't have to go through with the banking system. It goes right from your smartphone to their wallet node. So one example of how Bitcoin can be, very useful sending donations across the other side of the planet. So this is a short presentation on, this is very, very simplified. So Joel, this might, I'm sure we can add a lot to this, but I'm trying to keep it as simple as possible. Can you all see that?
Yes.
Bitcoin made simple.
The text is a little small, but as long as you can read it, that should be fine.
It'll zoom in. If I have this, of course, I'm going to have some demo demons here. Let me back up here.
I did see the slot machine.
There we go. There we go. All right. This is the fly through of the whole thing. So as Joel said, Bitcoin is cash for the internet. And just to give you some background, Bitcoin was the beginning of the cryptocurrency revolution. So everything else kind of came from this idea. And the idea came from a mysterious anonymous person or group of people. We still don't know who came up with this idea. So it has a cool origin story, sort of like Spider-Man or Batman. The guy's name, his pseudonym was Satoshi Nakamoto. And Satoshi Nakamoto, he released a white paper on October 31st, 2008. So a long time ago in internet time. And it's only 9 pages. It describes the Bitcoin protocol, and you can read it at this website here, bitcoin.org. The first block, so the white paper was just words on a page describing a protocol. And the initial project was developed open source. When it finally got up and running, the first block, called the Genesis block, was mined on January 3rd, 2009. So about, what is that, almost 13 years ago? Over 13 years ago, was the first Genesis block. That's the first block in a chain of blocks. We'll get into what that means. And it's interesting, in the first block, Satoshi Nakamoto, wherever this person was, he hid a newspaper article from the Times of London, I believe it was, but it talked about the banks being bailed out, for the third time or for some additional time. And it's sort of like a statement of intent on the whole purpose of Bitcoin was to sort of create another financial system that, didn't allow politicians to bail out their friends. And so that's kind of an interesting little piece of Bitcoin lore. So we'll talk about a distributed ledger. We'll talk about some of the underlying, fundamental pieces of how Bitcoin works. A distributed ledger you can think of like a spreadsheet. You've probably used Google Docs, right? It's a lot like a spreadsheet. It records transactions. And the interesting thing is, it's not just one copy of the ledger, but it's every computer, every person participating in the network has their own copy of the ledger. And the importance of that is it doesn't allow for a single point of failure. So you can't shut down one internet website. You have to go around the world and shut down millions and millions of copies of this thing, or to try to shut it down. So it's resilient in being attacked when it's distributed. But it raises the question, how does everyone agree on the same version of this ever-changing ledger that records the transactions and balances of everyone participating? So here's a really simplified version of the ledger. It's got timestamp, from John to Bob, 1 Bitcoin, no message. If you want, you can include a message, some arbitrary piece of data. So this is a little bit of a higher level concept. It's proof of work. Proof of work, it's a way of assembling transactions into blocks. So a block is many transactions, and it requires a computer node to guess a magic number, which is called the nonce. And that number is guessed from a very large set of numbers. So it takes a lot of guessing to get that number. And once a node in the network guesses that number, it's rewarded with discovering the next block in the chain. So when it discovers the solution, it broadcasts that solution to the rest of the network, and the network verifies it. All the nodes accept that block, and they move on to guessing the next block. So that's how the consensus is sort of determined in the Bitcoin blockchain. There are other consensus mechanisms, but this is the sort of the original one. And this is called Nakamoto consensus, actually, after the creator. Now, an interesting thing is that proof of work requires computation. So it requires running computers. And we know computers, if you plug them into the wall, they work. If you unplug them from the wall, they don't work. Computers require electricity to run. So, you'll hear a lot about how proof of work requires electricity. And that's the reason why, because it requires computation to guess the magic number called the nonce. All right. If I'm going too fast, I'll slow down, but I can take questions at the end. So another interesting thing or important thing to understand is a hash function. So we all have fingerprints, right? So a fingerprint identifies that our body, was present, or the rest of our body was present, but it's a small piece of data, in a forensics, when they're trying to discover who the murderer is, the fingerprint is proof that the murderer was there. And that's a lot like the result of a hash function. So it takes an arbitrary amount of data. An arbitrary amount of data could be anything. In this case, it's a bunch of transactions. And it creates a fixed length, a random number, much like a fingerprint. The important thing to note is if even one bit of the source data is tampered with, the generated fingerprint will change to a completely different random number. And so that lets you understand that the source data was not tampered with if you can prove the hash function. All computer data is represented by ones and zeros. The number of leading zeros to a hash can be significant, and we'll get into that in a minute. But this is sort of like, representation of the beginning of a hash number. So here we have 4 leading zeros. A chain of blocks equals a blockchain. That's a really simple explanation. But a block is a bundle of data from many transactions. It's put into like a hopper, like a waiting area. That's called the mempool. And so miners, the computers trying to solve blocks, they pull from that mempool a certain number of transactions, and they take the hash of the previous block of transactions. So the fingerprint from the previous block goes into the next block. And then this magic number called the nonce is added. And then all that data is hashed, over and over and over again, until the correctly guessed nonce satisfies the condition that the hash of the current block has a mandatory number of leading zeros. So that's if you're following me on that. Remember, if the data before, if a single bit was changed, the hash function changes. So by putting the hash of the previous block into the next block, it changed those blocks together, so that way the history can't be changed. If it is, if someone tries to change it, it'll be discovered very easily. So here's a really rudimentary picture of a blockchain. So we have the previous hash, the transaction data, all that gets hashed to a hash that satisfies the difficulty adjustment or the difficulty calculation. And then that hash gets put into the next block, and so on and so on. And in the Bitcoin blockchain, this happens every 10 minutes, approximately.
Hey, Keith,
Yeah.
Can I interrupt here?
Yep.
I don't understand all the technical details. Basically, what you're saying is that this is all mathematical computations, but it's these mathematical challenges or computations are being solved across hundreds or thousands of different computers.
Right.
And that makes it decentralized and distributed and not authoritarian. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. I only have 3 more bubbles and then I'll be done. So that's right. That's the basics of it. So something called the difficulty adjustment. Remember those leading zeros? Think of it like slots on a slot machine. So here, this picture, we have 3 slots, and there's a certain probability every time you pull the lever that you'll get cherries in a row. But if you add 4 slots, 5 slots, 100 slots, it changes the probability. It makes it much harder to get all cherries in a row. That's how the difficulty adjustment works. That hash function, there's a requirement that the zeros in front of it, the leading zeros, the number of required zeros increases or decreases. That's called the difficulty adjustment. That happens about every 2 weeks on average in the Bitcoin blockchain. And it depends on how many other computers are trying to solve. So that prevents somebody firing up a whole bunch of computers to try to take over the network, that the difficulty will be adjusted to account for those additional computers. And it brings it back so that a block is solved on average every 10 minutes. So just think of the leading zeros as the slot machine. And that gets us into the mining reward. So when you solve that magic number, you get rewarded by the network. A miner gets rewarded, and they get rewarded with spontaneously generated new Bitcoins. And that transaction is broadcast out to the rest of the network. So by guessing the magic number, that node gets new Bitcoin. And this is important because this generates the scarcity on the Bitcoin blockchain. So Bitcoin, there are only ever going to be 21 million Bitcoins in existence. There's about 19 million already solved. And this mining reward for guessing that new block gets cut in half every 4 years approximately. So in 2009, when it first started, there were 50 new Bitcoins every 10 minutes. And then 4 years later, it was cut to 25 Bitcoins every 2 minutes, and then 12 and a half, 6 and a quarter. That's what we're currently at. And so the mining reward gets cut in half every 4 years. It's scheduled to end in the year 2140 approximately. And at that point in time, there will only ever be 21 million Bitcoins in existence. And then the network will run on something called mining fees, which we can get into if you want. So each whole Bitcoin is divisible by 8 decimal points, and this creates 21 quadrillion monetary units, like a penny. So 21 million might not sound like a lot, but when you get into the divisibility, 21 quadrillion, I think it would take like 10,000 of our current galaxies, the number of stars in our current galaxies. Number of stars in our current galaxy multiplied by 10,000 is 21 quadrillion approximately. I'm sorry, that should be 2.1 quadrillion. That's a typo.
Wow.
And then lastly, and this is the important part, this is about public and private keys. This is sort of like the keys to your ignition on your car, right? Like if someone steals your keys, they can steal your car. So cryptographic keys are how ownership of accounts and transactions are proven on that ledger. So a private key is a very long random number. It's similar to like a secret password, but it's much longer. And if someone steals your private key, they can take ownership of your coins. They can move your coins to another account that they control, and you no longer have control of those coins. A public key is derived from a private key, but a private key cannot be derived from a public key. This is called asymmetric encryption. So an easy way to think about it is a private key is a password and a public key is an email address. So an email address, you give it out to people that you want them to send you things, but you don't give them the password to your email account, right? So they can read all your emails. So in Bitcoin, we have, I think I showed you in the beginning, Ukraine, this is their Bitcoin address, right? So they can put that on the internet, and that's sort of like their public key. And I can send Bitcoin to that address, and because they're the only ones that have their private key, they control the Bitcoins after they get sent to that address. So that's sort of like a whirlwind tour of how the Bitcoin blockchain works. And on top of this, just initial foundation, there's so much innovation happening, and it's a giant rabbit hole that you can get stuck down. But if you want to understand how to participate in the system, this will just give you a good foundation on how the gears sort of mesh together underneath the covers. So
Wow.
hopefully that was helpful.
That's very helpful, Keith. Thank you. That is great. And We'll ask Joelle to go into some other things because Bitcoin is the generic name. And people who are early adopters got into Bitcoin, but now there are hundreds of different options. But before Joelle starts, Amy, are there any comments or questions in the chat room that we want to address based on Keith's presentation? If y'all have any questions, please put them in the chat room. If not, then Joelle, tell us a little bit more about, you're a big fan of Dash, you're an expert there, but there are now hundreds of different cryptocurrencies and they have different use cases. And some are called altcoins and some are just called competitors to Bitcoin. Why don't you share with us some of those names and what their use cases are?
Yeah, so if one were to consider, like Bitcoin is I guess the father technology that everything else is based on. And the thing about open source technology, as this is, meaning it's public work, it's like a public blueprint that's out there for anyone to copy. Anyone could just literally copy and paste the Bitcoin code and make a different one. And some have, and some have tweaked some parameters, be like, well, I think that the block should come out faster. I think it should come out slower. I think we should change this or that. And so there have been countless, and I believe thousands of separate chains, even maybe thousands, that have been created over the last decade. And a lot of them similar use cases, a lot of them different. The biggest, I guess, name that people would know would be Ethereum, which has a very somewhat overlap, but a very different use case in that it's smart contracts, which is a self-executing contract or self-executing kind of a thing. Whereas like if I want to, if like Keith sends me an invoice and I want to pay it, I would, under, most cryptocurrencies, right? You'd look at it and say, all right, I think I want to pay that. And I manually say, pay Keith this much, you pay him. Whereas a smart contract would have some kind of like auto executing rules where it says, if Keith invoices you for this amount and it matches the hourly rate for your work and that, automatically send him a payment for this. And then when he sends an invoice, he just gets paid automatically. And there's a whole bunch of things that programmable money can do. And there's one thing, for example, that became big in the 2017 era was the ICO boom, which was basically like an IPO, but initial coin offering where people could just raise a ton of money and they just issue shares of although that's it's a different rabbit hole. So I'm not going to go too far down that because there's a million caveats to that, but you could just issue a whole bunch of shares of something basically and raise capital pretty easily, like on your own. And then you have, of course, the DeFi boom or decentralized finance boom, whereas you could do financial products that are they're run without an institution offering them to you. So like right now, if you want to, let's just say, open a savings account at a bank, you have to go to a bank that's run by people and you have to say, here's my money. And then they take it and then they loan it out to people and then they get interest from that, right? They make money from that and then they pass some of that on to you. All that is done in an automated fashion with DeFi, for example, with decentralized finance. You can just put money in and there's no one verifying you. It's like the rules, the system all does that. And then automatically gets return on all that. You kind of cut out the middleman of an institution on that. And then finally, one thing that's more common these days is NFTs, or non-fungible tokens, which I think are in an extremely early stage so that people just see them as like, oh, this is a digital artwork, that I have a one-of-one copy of a digital artwork. But really, I think that, for example, like property titles will be NFTs in the future. It's just whereas something like Bitcoin is a fungible token, as it's called, as in it's a token, but there's tons of them out there, or 21 million in Bitcoin's case. Whereas a non-fungible token is just a one of one, like your diploma, right? That's a one of one record. You have that diploma, or your property title or whatever else. And so basically all that kind of stuff is being built on a variety of different coins. There's other ones like, for example, let's say Dash, Litecoin, things like that, that are similar to Bitcoin, but are more purposed for easy and fast, secure payments rather than like a base monetary system. And then you have other projects, let's say Zcash, Monero, Firo, other things like that, which also serve that money thing, but their focus is on providing greater transaction privacy and to make things a lot easier to hide. And then there's things like the library network, LBRY, which is focused on basically running infrastructure for a content platform like YouTube. Let's just say the back end of a YouTube. Whereas if YouTube decides to kick you off, that's it, you're done. But if library's main website, Odyssey, for example, decided to kick you off, you could literally just create your own and you're back in business. All your subscribers, all your videos, everything is just still there. So those are just a few of the use cases that come to mind. Some of the other projects that have come out of after the base decentralized digital records for money, which is what kind of Bitcoin was. There's a bunch of other different permutations of that use cases. Ooh, muted again.
Hard to take all that in. Let me ask both you guys, what is the current state of affairs in regards to using cryptocurrencies for everyday transactions? Because I think that was part of the original idea, at least among libertarians. And we heard about this in Pre-State Project. And over the years, at Pork Fest and other events, we've had people selling services and products in exchange for cryptocurrency payments instead of Federal Reserve notes or US dollars. So where do you see going forward, and where are we today with the use of cryptocurrencies for actually a payment?
Yeah. So let me start out real quick with that, and then I guess Keith can answer some of the bigger parts. I mean, this is literally what I've been doing for the last half decade or so, and it's as an experiment. It's not always gone smoothly, but I've managed to make it work. But today, you can, if you know a few tricks, conceivably live off of cryptocurrency, depending on your life, depending on the workarounds. You can buy most things with it directly, or in some cases indirectly, with a variety of services. Now, I personally believe that we're getting really close to this being something that everyone can do. Like, I think it could be as soon as 5 years from now, when the average person can figure out a relatively easy way to just spend this as their only money.
Keith?
Yeah, I was going to say, there's been an ongoing debate about, so money has different properties, right? And one of them is a store of value, and another is a medium of exchange. So store of value is sort of like gold, where you can hoard gold, but you can't go to the store and buy coffee with it, right? So that's the store of value use case. The medium of exchange use case is being able, it's like cash, is like being able to go pay your bills and buy your groceries with it. In the United States, as Joel said, there are some places that will accept it. In New Hampshire, even, you can go to different restaurants and they'll accept it. In the country of El Salvador, they've actually passed, the president actually pushed to pass a law to make it legal tender in the country of El Salvador. So, if something like that were to happen here, you could go everywhere and use it. And currently in El Salvador, there's, you can go use it at the laundromat and at the coffee shop and so forth. And with Bitcoin specifically, there's, I mentioned Bitcoin, there's new blocks every 10 minutes. And Joel had mentioned, well, some spin-offs of Bitcoin change the block time. So there's layers on top of Bitcoin. There's something called the Lightning Network that's on top of Bitcoin that we can get into. And that's used in El Salvador, from what I understand, that it's much faster and cheaper transactions, but it settles onto the Bitcoin blockchain. So So the technology is catching up, and the infrastructure, in society is catching up, and the legal system in some parts of the world is catching up to converge on having this possibly be a more common medium of exchange.
I would love to see that. In fact, right now I'm here in the Dominican Republic, and one of the best use cases for Bitcoin or any of these other cryptocurrencies is actually for remittances, whether you're in the United States sending money back to Mexico or the Philippines or Dominican Republic. I mean, this could drastically lower the cost, the friction cost compared to, let's say, Western Union. So I think that's a fantastic use case, but we're still a long way away from wide adoptability. So I think that's a good one. And at least people in New Hampshire and the Free State Project are making this, they're showing the world how it can be used. Like you can buy a cup of coffee or a jar of honey or a barbecue sandwich with Bitcoin Cash or Dash in New Hampshire. It's pretty awesome. All right, some people have been asked us about how to hold cryptocurrency. Let's say you want to buy a fraction of a Bitcoin or some Dash or any other of the hundreds of cryptocurrencies. How do you hold it? Can you explain to our Crypto 101 audience what is a wallet versus what is an exchange, and are those things really private?
Thoughts already gone.
Yeah, so I could break that out pretty quickly. A wallet, I mean, it's a great word. A wallet is just like your own wallet. It's just a container to hold money. In this case, it's a digital container to hold digital money. So, for example, if I have a wallet on my phone, it's the money, the access to the money is on the phone. It's on the actual device. And so if you lose your phone, you could lose the money unless you back it up, which there's a special backup. Basically, wherever you keep your crypto, you can back it up. In most cases, let me just be super generalized to make it more simple, by writing down 12 or 24 magic words that they give you on a piece of paper. And those magic words can always get your money back no matter where. And so we put that in the safe. But so you have a phone wallet, which is a mobile wallet. That's just like your pocket wallet, like what you'd have on your person. And then there's a bunch of different kinds of wallets, but the other main one would be a hardware wallet, which is it's a physical device that you could consider that like your safe. Like I happen to have one on my desk right here. So you just have one of these, you plug it in to your computer, and then you can access the money. But once you yank out that cord, it's just dark and no one can touch it. And so most people use one of these as their storage, their savings, like the mattress money, right? Stuff the money in the mattress. And then the phone wallet is what you use for your everyday going around spending. Now, an exchange it's kind of funny because it's actually like a brokerage service, but they tend to call them exchanges because they have an exchange functionality. But a exchange like, say, Coinbase is the one people would have heard of, or maybe Kraken, or maybe, there's a few others. Consider that like a bank, like a crypto bank, because that's how you buy crypto with fiat, or dollars. To us, regular people, it might seem like you're buying crypto, but you're really exchanging one money for another. And with that, you have to give your government ID, you have to do all that stuff. It's just like a bank. But then you get what you consider digital cash, just like you withdraw cash from your bank account, then you can do whatever you want with it. It's the same thing. You withdraw your digital cash into, your phone wallet or your hardware wallet. And so that's kind of the quick summary of how you store it. You store it on either a small, a very specific physical device for long-term, really safe storage, or you store it on your phone device.
So the easiest way, if you're new to all this, the easiest way that I found is you find a service that lets you, it's called dollar cost averaging. So let's say you want to build up a stash of Bitcoin or some other cryptocurrency. You can do it through Coinbase. You can do it through, I think, Kraken. You can do it through Swan Bitcoin. There's different exchanges that you connect your account with them to your bank account, and you set up like a daily or weekly or monthly, however often you want to do it. Let's say you wanted to buy $50 of Bitcoin every Monday at market price, and you just set it and forget it. And, you know, what I tell people is until you have, you know, a number that's significant to you on that exchange, you know, just don't worry about it. Just let the dollar cost averaging happen. And then once you get an amount that you don't want to lose, then you transfer it to something like a hardware wallet or even your phone. You know, there's different software that you can run on your phone, wallet software, wallet apps, you know, they call them. Like Coinomi is one, Jax with 2 X's is one. Coinbase has their own wallet. So there's tons of apps. If you just search Bitcoin wallet on your app store on your phone, you'll see a bunch of them come up. But so that's what I suggest to people. Find an exchange that lets you set up a regular buy, set it and forget it. You know, like you're not going to risk your rent money purchasing this because it's volatile. It could go to zero. You only want to, you know, risk money that you're willing to lose. And if you're worried about the price going up and down, just set a regular buy so that, you know, it's going to average out. You're going to get, you know, most likely over a long period of time, meaning like a year or 2 years, the price will appreciate. That's what it's done in the history of it. You're speaking mainly about Bitcoin. And you just, you know, don't worry about the price when you buy it, unless you have a bunch of money and you know it feels like a dip. Like we're in kind of a dip right now. That's what it feels like to me. I don't know the future, but you know, a regular amount purchased over, you know, a period of time, and then when you get an amount that you don't want to lose on the exchange, you move it to a wallet that you control the keys to, and you know, and then do that regularly. You kind of sweep your account.
Well, I'll give you a bit of a personal anecdote, which had to do with using an exchange. I decided to use an exchange called Coinbase because it was all easy to use online. Their user interface was simple for a boomer like me. You could tie it to your bank account. So I could transfer money from my checking account into Coinbase. And then inside that exchange, I could easily buy a number of different coins, Ethereum, Bitcoin, etc. And I just found the user part of it very nice. I like the exchange, but you lose some privacy. Actually, you lose a lot of privacy with that, which was part of the original intent of Bitcoin to be pseudonymous. And they report to the tax authorities. So there are a lot of downsides to that. So I would recommend if you guys are starting out, especially if you want to do small amounts, then you don't need to jump in right into an exchange. Just get one of these wallets with the guy's name, like Coinomi or Jax or one of the others, and then go to one of our regular meetups. Every Sunday night in Manchester, they have a Bitcoin meetup. I think Joel hosts a crypto meetup on the Seacoast once a week. And
twice, once a month right at the moment.
Twice a month. And then you can go to them and they'll help you set up this wallet on your phone. And then you can just give them $100, people in the crowd, $100, $200, buy some cryptocurrency. There's a way to get into it at a very small amount and sort of be off the books. So that's one recommendation I'd have. Then eventually, if you want to get into a big time, then you may have to get into one of the big exchanges. So let's talk about privacy coins, because my big concern about being on Coinbase is that now it's tied to the government because they use know your customer, which is KYC, and I reported on my taxes for short-term and long-term taxes. But there's something called a privacy coin where it's really hard for the government to track it. So just when do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I have a little bit of a bone to pick with the term because it's it's sort of a media made up term, kind of like you want everything to have some level of privacy, right? And just like you want everything to have some level of security. But basically, when people mention that, they're mentioning higher forms of privacy with cryptocurrency. Now, the one thing with all these cryptocurrencies, they do have a base level of privacy, meaning they're not tied to your real identity necessarily. So I could send Mark some money and he has it, and people don't know it's him that has it. They just know some long string of cryptographic hashes that has them. And even if they followed the trail of the money, they wouldn't know the person behind it unless they managed to link it somewhere else. But most cryptocurrencies, like Bitcoin's one of them, but also even worse, I would say, was ones like Ethereum. They're even easier. All transactions are completely public on the blockchain, right? It's a public ledger. Everyone can just look at the big spreadsheet and just see where all the money went to whom at all times. Usually this isn't so much of a problem because you don't know who is behind which account, more or less, which address. You don't really know the people behind it, but it still can become a huge problem if someone does know that. Like, for example, if you buy something and there's someone's technologically savvy, they can see where that came from. They say, okay, I see the person in his face. I know that's his transaction. Now I'm going to follow his money in case he makes a whole lot, and then I'll figure out how to upcharge him or something, or steal from him. I don't know. It could be. It's important to have financial privacy. So there are some cryptocurrencies there, as well as some techniques that you can use on the more transparent cryptocurrencies that can make this a lot harder to trace. And so, for example, on Bitcoin, there's this methodology, I should say, called CoinJoin, which basically means you and a bunch of other people all put your money in this one big pool. They mix it all together, and then you get your amount back, but it was all mixed with everyone else's coins. So they don't really. So when you send it, they can't really say it came from you or the addresses you control. It just they can't. It kind of obfuscates, the origins and stuff, the transactions, and that's not a by default functionality for Bitcoin, but there's some services that let you do that. And there's something similar on Ethereum, I would say, called Tornado Cash that does something kind of similar. But then there's some, for example, Monero and Zcash in particular have built-in functionality to make this kind of thing happen. Like Monero has a decoy model, so when you're looking at the transactions, it could have gone to one of like 10 places, but you have to guess which one. You could be wrong, right? And then with Zcash, it's encrypted, so you really can't see anything. It's just almost completely dark when that happens. And so those are some of the approaches you can do to kind of ratchet up financial privacy. I do think that within a few years of this becoming mainstream, of people trusting this for their everyday money, you're going to see every single major successful project have some form of advanced privacy on it, because no one is going to use the greater public is never going to use something where anyone that they pay can then find out exactly how much money they have.
And we're seeing institutions take some of their own capital and investing it in cryptocurrency, and large companies are also not going to want their competitors to know how much they're spending and on what they're spending it. So privacy is definitely going to be a feature that's in demand. And so I guess we could touch on like Bitcoin as like the basic the first one. Bitcoin has a property that's it's called a pseudonymous or pseudoanonymity, if you wanted to pronounce it the long way. And it means like when you generate an address, only you know that that address belongs to you. But if you use an intermediary like an exchange, that exchange ties your identity to that address. And so, you know, it's a random string of numbers that's not tied to anyone unless you go through an intermediary that is able to tie that address to you. And there are companies like, there's a company in Europe called Chainalysis, where they try to gather as many inputs as they can. And they're trying to, you know, map the blockchain to see whose addresses belong to whom. And the techniques that Joel was talking about are, you know, kind of thwart that surveillance, and are becoming more popular over time.
And certainly, as a public disclosure, we don't want to encourage anybody to hide their assets from the government. That's a given. But you know, there are all these other options out there for you. And in many ways, just exchanging a cryptocurrency is like exchanging cash. You know, the banks don't really know about it. If you buy chickens and eggs from somebody for $20 cash versus giving them Bitcoin, $20 worth of Bitcoin, there's no difference. So we want to encourage this innovation in the space, but people should still follow the proper tax laws and that sort of thing.
Yeah, but you also wouldn't put a sign in your front yard with how much money you had in the bank, right? Like that's sort of what we're talking about. We want to, privacy is an important thing to protect your, you know, your own security.
And that was one of the original attractive features about this for people in our space and libertarian community, was that it is sort of anonymous. Also, another thing is you can go to a Bitcoin ATM. There's machines that sell Bitcoin. You put cash in and get Bitcoin out. You just zap it to your phone. So those are ways to get a little bit and get started in the space, just to play around with it. And again, we're not limiting ourselves to Bitcoin. We're using it almost as a generic term, but there are tons of different coins out there and cryptocurrencies that you might find a good use case for. Okay.
Yeah, that's correct.
We want to wrap up in the next few minutes, and certainly reach out to you guys who are on the call and ask if you have any questions. I mean, you have a couple of experts here, and we know we threw a lot out to you, but certainly ask your questions now. And I'll remind people that we have another webinar coming up next week, a week from tonight, same time with the same panelists. We're going to drill down a little bit more into the technology of it. I'll talk about buying real estate with Bitcoin, which we've already done here in New Hampshire a few times. And one of the questions I have for you guys is, what's up and coming? If people, let me ask one more thing. If you feel like you want to get started and you think that Bitcoin is going to go to the moon, or Ethereum or Bitcoin Cash or Dash or any of these others, one way to play that is to buy cryptocurrencies within a Roth IRA. And there are a few funds out there that are doing that, because when inside a Roth IRA, you take out the proceeds in the future tax-free. So if you still think there's going to be a 5x, 10x, or better return on some of these things, that's something to consider. We don't give it tax advice here at Porcupine Real Estate. We're not talking about, you know, how to invest, but it's something to consider as a public service. We thought we'd talk about that. For some questions. Go ahead.
Yeah, so sorry, was that what was the exact question?
Question is, are there, for people who are looking at long-term holdings of some of these cryptocurrencies, what are some of the good options for us?
You mean as far as like where should people kind of direct their capital? Is that kind of the angle?
The angle is, a lot of us originally wanted to use this as just day-to-day transactions. but other people looking at it as more of a long-term hold, as sort of investment, or a like gold, just a way to hedge against inflation. So what are some of the best ways to hold 3, 5, 10 years, some of the cryptocurrencies?
Yeah, so hold and store are, I guess, the same type of thing, like wherever you store in your hardware wallet is a good place to kind of do that. The thing is, just this is one of those questions that I think that each year I'm in this gets harder to answer because everything kind of moves so quickly. Um, Historically, it seems like Bitcoin and specifically Bitcoin and Ethereum have been some of the more safer long-term bets because um, so much work has been done in those ecosystems to where at some point it's kind of like a stone just keeps rolling downhill. It just kind of keeps acquiring, potential, and it just becomes more of a sure thing over time. Uh, I am probably the least seasoned in the sort of investment kind of thesis kind of thing because I've been mostly just using it as a replacement for everyday money that I've been using. However, I would encourage anyone who has time to go down a crazy rabbit hole to look into the DeFi or decentralized finance ecosystem because it's just like when people invest in dollars, they don't buy dollars. They don't just hold a sack of cash in there. I mean, some people do, right? But just you typically don't just hold a stack of cash and then that's it. Like you invest it explicitly. And so buying and holding crypto is like having a sack of cash under your mattress. There's nothing wrong with that. But if for people wanting to invest, there's other ways you can take that same sack of cash, the metaphorical sack of cash, and kind of do things with it. Uh, Probably my favorite because it's simpler to understand and I think more useful for people who aren't deep into the DeFi world. A project is Thorchain, which is basically a decentralized exchange and finance platform. But basically, what they will very soon, as far as I know, going to be offering is it's basically like a decentralized savings account to where you can deposit some Bitcoin, and then you can get, let's just pick a number like 5% interest, year over year on that Bitcoin paid in Bitcoin, and because basically what you're doing is you're putting that into a decentralized liquidity pool, which basically means you're just like a bank account, you're lending it out and other people are using that money to do things, and then you're getting paid for that, except instead of sending it to a person or a person controlled thing, it's kind of like an algorithm controlled pool, which at any time you can just withdraw it and it just comes right back out. And so that's one of the things that I'm kind of more looking forward to being able to do as like an easy recommendation.
Wow. Well, there's a ton of innovation in this space. And next week, when we do our Crypto 202, we'll talk a little bit more about the DeFi space, about DAO, about NFTs. We can get into that. Amy, did you have a question?
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about what transaction fees are and the transaction times?
Yeah.
Transaction fees. Yeah.
I'll let you go first, Keith, and I'll jump into this.
Yeah. So it depends on what blockchain that you're talking about. So a transaction, so there's a transaction fee that's part of the protocol on a lot of these coins. And then there's an exchange fee, which is something the exchange might charge you to exchange between US dollars and say Ethereum. So they're two different things, but built into the protocol itself. If you remember in that little presentation I gave, that in the year 2140, there will be no more new Bitcoins mined. And so as part of each transaction, when you send it, a lot of times the wallet will calculate it for you automatically, but some allow you to adjust it. You can add a few cents or $1 or a couple dollars to the transaction, and that's a reward for the miner that solves that block. And so when everybody transmits all their transactions and they go into the hopper called the mempool, so they're waiting to go into blocks, what the miners will do is sort list based on the transaction fee. So by giving a higher transaction fee, you're sort of jumping to the head of the line, that you're sort of guaranteeing that you'll be in the next block. And that reward goes to the miner. So it's all based on game theory and incentives, which is sort of like the fascinating thing about this technology. It incentivizes random strangers all around the world to participate in securing this whole system. And the transaction fees help to incentivize your participation and reward the miner that allows you to participate in it. So hopefully that explains it.
Yeah, let me kind of that's kind of like the background of like how fees work and why they do like that. Pretty much on most cryptocurrencies, the fees are extremely small to just send and receive. And that's it, to be honest, a lot of that is because a lot of them don't have it's kind of like wait times at your local coffee shop if there's only a couple customers. It's like they're not used enough to have very high fees. The high fee king right now would be Ethereum, because it has a lot of complex operations it needs to do, and there's a lot of people trying to use it right now. And so to move some Ethereum could be like a few dollars right now, and to do a complex transaction such as an exchanging one token for another, which has this like the self-executing contract thing I was telling you about before, that could be like $20 for a fee, or $30. It could be, some people pay a whole lot in fees on those. Bitcoin used to be the high fee king, and since it has gotten a little bit better, and like, I don't know, what is it, 30, 50 cents, maybe $1 is what you expect to like send. And there are some other things such as, the Lightning Network, which are, it's a layer on top of that makes stuff cheaper. But basically, it should be relative. Most cryptocurrencies should be almost free to use. The two major ones could be a little more expensive depending on what you do. But on a more, I guess, philosophical note, on the long term, I believe that cryptocurrencies are going to be easier and cheaper to use than dollars in most banking apps and things like that, because every time you use a banking app, there's some sort of a company behind that, whether it's the bank itself, whether it's like a PayPal or a payment processor. And it's this large institution with a ton of employees, infrastructure, fees, regulation, all this stuff that just adds costs. And I mean, like, for example, anyone who's ever, closed on a house, closing costs are not just like, pay you like $20 in paperwork. Like, no, there's a lot that goes into closing costs, because there's a lot of people in between you and buying the house at the end of the day. And so the financial system works kind of the same way, in that there's a lot of people that need to get paid before a payment is settled. And with cryptocurrency, it's basically just the network itself. And so they're just one decentralized party, and that will, in my opinion, make it very economical to transact in the future.
Excellent. All right, we're going to wrap up in a couple of minutes, but check your chat box, because Keith put a few interesting links in there about different wallets. And Paula would like to address your question. Paula asked, who manages the software for all this?
That's a good question.
It's distributed. I don't know what that means. So go ahead.
Yeah. So Joel mentioned that it's something called open source software. So there's proprietary software, which is closed source, like Microsoft Windows. You can't read the source code for Microsoft Windows. And then there's something called open source, like Linux, all the distributions of Linux. You can read, if you can understand it, every line of code that goes into building the Linux operating system. And the advantage to open source is you get lots of eyeballs on it, and anybody can copy it and make and improve on it by just copying, just like, copying all the source code. And so that's sort of, without open source, without that concept of open source, none of this would have happened, because it puts the system out in the public domain. And, you think like Bitcoin is almost $750 billion in value, the Bitcoin network. So there's a really high reward to anyone that can hack the Bitcoin protocol itself. But everybody can see the code. So all the vulnerabilities, knock on wood, have been identified, and the Bitcoin protocol itself has not been hacked. When you hear in the news that Bitcoin has been stolen, someone hacked into an exchange. Most often that's the case, or someone fell for a scam where they gave up their private keys and their information, but the protocol itself hasn't been hacked. And that's because, lots of eyeballs looking for defects in the code is actually a good thing. And I just wanted to throw a couple of things out there. So there's a lot of speculation in the space. What you tend to see is the true believers hold on to their coins, and the speculative, the speculative bubble builds, and then it pops, and it builds, and it pops. And that accounts for the wild swings. And there's also a lot of scams in the space, because anybody can make a new coin, throw up a flashy website, and try to scam people that it's the next big thing, right? And so you want to be careful what sources you pay attention to on the internet, because you can really give away a lot of money to a scammer. And it's usually some new token or some new coin that's going to be the best, the next big thing. And, a small group of people will promote it. And then once the money comes into their token, they cash it all out and disappear. And then the token sort of becomes a zombie running on the internet. So, it's not without some danger getting involved in this space. So you want to stick with the exchanges and the wallets and the websites that have a long track record and a good history of providing reliable information.
Yeah, to basically add to that whole point, we're talking about freedom here, right? And this is a radically free financial system. And freedom means freedom to do anything, including, scam people. And so just like in a completely free society, you associate with the people that you trust and want to associate. There's like buyer beware on stuff. You can buy any product. If it's a terrible product, you just don't buy it again, or you trust other people's reviews. It's the exact same kind of thing with this. It's not, you should do your own research, which is, an off-quoted, term. Do your own research and just don't trust, but verify.
Well, that's good advice. And I admit that I'm a novice. So we on the call will rely on you two guys to give us more information. And I really appreciate you both being here tonight. We certainly appreciate all the people who have tuned in to this webinar. And Joelle, why don't you give us your contact information so people can follow you, and then Keith, do the same.
Yeah, so I run a show called Digital Cash Network. And if you just look up Digital Cash Network on YouTube, on Odyssey, which is the decentralized YouTube, you look it up on Twitter, TikTok, anywhere. Anywhere it is, I'll be there. And I guess my personal Twitter, which is where most people find like public figures, Twitter and Telegram would be the Desert Links, which is, desert is in kitty cat, links is in, desert is in hot place, links is in kitty cat. And I'm there. I'm always able to be contacted. Or if at any time you want like my personal number or anything, just ping Mark and he'll set you up.
I just threw mine into the chat there. So I have my Twitter handle and my personal email account. That's the best way to find me. My
might as well write mine down too.
Yeah, go ahead. My Twitter is going to be some partisan. I like to tweak my opponents in the legislature. So just know I'm having fun when I'm doing it.
Well, I appreciate you both, guys. You've given us a lot of information, and also given us a lot of questions to ask even further about. And I think we can go down the rabbit hole on this. But we'll do another webinar next week. at 6 o'clock. And both of these will be recorded. So they'll be available for posterity to check out. And if you miss one, we can certainly send you a link. Amy at Porcupine Real Estate will have that information. We're on Facebook as well. And great questions tonight, great information. And let's hope that all of us in this room, can benefit from this in the long haul. We know the government is printing money like there's no tomorrow, and perhaps cryptocurrencies offer us an option, a hedge against inflation. Maybe we can build some wealth among our Liberty community. So that's the best part about all this. So thank you all. Thanks, panelists. Thanks for the people who joined us. And we'll see you again next week.
Bye, everyone.